Hi, everyone. Again, Stephanie with the patient story. And we're just about to talk to Matthew now about the actual treatment that you underwent. And at the very end, we'll also talk about there were complications. And then how out of those complications, grew this amazing sort of new part of your life. So excited to get into that. But before we do, when your oncologist, and you were working with an oncologist at Cleveland Clinic, right? What kind of oncologist was it? Was it urological? And then, how did he or she explain how the chemo would go, how your overall treatment plan looked?
Absolutely. So I was actually, with the clinic, since they're so incredible, they actually have a specific testicular cancer oncologist. They have a couple of them, and they linked me right up with the best one they could get. His name was Timothy Gilligan. Great guy, very personal. And, right then, I was immediately put on what's called BEP, and that's Bleomycin and Cysplatin. And they did not hesitate. When they found out that cancer, I was on it that day. They're like, we need to get you into the chemo room and do it. And they actually kept me in the hospital for 6 days because they wanted to make sure that they knew, basically they wanted to make sure there was no complications. So they didn't want to see any thing going wrong with the chemo or anything like that, and made sure that it was doing its job as well. So, right then and there, I was put onto bleomycin and cisplatin. So how it works is I ended up going through 5 rounds of it. And usually, but since my testicular cancer was so high and kind of fast growing, they had to add an extra round to it. They only usually do 4 rounds for that kind of stuff. So how it works is you have 5 days, Monday through Friday, of cisplatin and etoposide. And then you have, I believe, just 1 Monday of bleomycin. And that's it, because it's a crazy strong drug. It really hits your lungs hard and in your body. And then you get a week off, and then you repeat it. So it's like a 2-week process for 5 rounds. And it lasted, 2.5, 3 months. And, they told me, they said, hey, Matt, like day 7 is going to be your worst day for sure. Day 7 is going to be your worst day, because what happens is all of those drugs are trying to get out of your system, within a day or two, and your body is just fighting everything it can. I mean, this is very, like, BEP is one of the most intense therapies for sure. And the reason they did it with me is because I was so young and I could handle it. So, basically day 7 comes along, and I remember waking up and I'm like, whoa, I cannot even move, like legit cannot move. Like I felt like total death. And at that point they actually released me from the hospital on Saturday. So it was Monday through Friday, and then Saturday they released me, and Sunday I was like,
everything.
Oh, it was rough. Yeah. And I remember Lauren was with me that night. I was at my parents. I was staying at my parents. I had just moved in, literally just moved into an apartment, and now I'm out of the apartment and at my parents again.
Right.
And
because you need
she
that
had to help me.
support, right? Yeah, you need caregivers. Before we dive into that, though, and all the side effects, I do want to ask you. So you were inpatient Monday through Friday. They discharged you Saturday, and that was 1 week on, 1 week off, and then it would continue for 5 rounds. The infusions in the hospital with the, especially the EP and then the B, that was once a week, it sounds like. How long were the infusions? And then I'd also love, I know people like to ask about IV versus PICC line versus port.
Yes.
So just before we get into, actually, I know you eventually got the port, but it was IV first. So if you could describe that situation.
Yeah. So they didn't want to do port in the beginning. They thought I could get through all of my chemo without it. I had really good veins because of how much I lifted. So yeah, that first round, really the first 4 rounds, I went through it, but we'll stick with the first round. Basically, they would find good veins in my arm. They would make sure that I got good blood return, and that then they could put saline back into the system. And then once that was good, they would give me the chemotherapy. And the chemotherapy with cisplatin and etoposide lasted about 3 to 4 hours. It was about an hour and a half to 2 hours per drug. And, just sit there. I'd get pretty tired, obviously. I was extremely nervous the first day I went in, but I knew that, like, hey, listen, this is what I have to get done and this is what I need to do. So, so that's what they did for me there. And, it was a tough first week mentally for me, for sure, because I was still wrapping my head around a lot of the things that was going on. But, as I was doing it, as you can see this picture, I was with Lauren and, my parents, and it really helped me a lot. It was a lot, it was a lot to go through. At the time, as you can see, I have like red hair. If I took my head off, I have red hair. So, losing that hair was really challenging. I ended up losing that in around the second round, but, that's kind of how everything kind of went and was around that time. So bleomycin was really short though. The bleo only took about 15 minutes. A very small drug, but very powerful and very, basically, as you know, chemo destroys everything in your body, good cells and bad cells.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And I love, I love this picture. Obviously it's a very candid moment. And I was going to ask, since you were inpatient, it's a long time to be in the hospital, an entire week, essentially almost an entire week. So besides having Lauren and your parents there, any guidance to people on how to get through longer hospital stays, especially when you have to go through multiple?
Yeah. How I would say to get through it is, number one, you have to look at the bigger picture. I know it's tough in the moment. A lot of times we get so caught up in the moment. And I have to stay in the hospital for 3 days. I have to stay in the hospital for 10 days. When am I ever going to get out of it? But think of it this way, like this is all setting you up for something so much bigger in your life. And yes, it's tough in the moment, but I know I always go back to support, but relying on my faith, relying on my support system, and every single day focusing on one little thing that can help progress me forward to getting out of the hospital or to getting me to where I need to be. It might be getting up and walking on a day that I feel a little better, or eating something and getting some calories in my body, or whatever it was. So that really helped me to relieve a lot of the emotional stress of just being in that hospital all the time, keep myself busy and really trying to not constantly focus on the negative parts of this journey, for sure.
Right, which can be so hard, but sounds like you really try to stick to that path. And then, okay, so we do love talking, of course, about side effects because people have so many questions about that. When did you start to feel the first side effects? Was it in the hospital? I know it culminated the worst day 7 when you were at home, but if you could kind of help describe what those side effects were, when they hit you, and then what helped you with them.
Yeah, Monday through Friday, the very first round was towards Friday. I could start to feel it for sure. I was getting a little tired, a little weak, but day 6, I was like, okay, I'm not feeling great, but I can walk a little bit. And then day 7, just a total train wreck. It was basically number 1, total fatigue. Like when I say fatigue, like not getting out of bed. Number 2 is they constantly put me on nausea medication. So thank goodness I was very lucky because I've heard some really crazy stories of nausea and, having those symptoms. So I made sure I took my nausea medicine, which was, thank goodness, which was great. But I also started to, and this, I think we had pretty much everything to do with my anxiety, was I started to get some rashes on my stomach and my chest and everything when I would get the chemo. And this was closer to the 3rd and 4th round. And I would just remember like freaking out. And then all of a sudden I get these rashes and doctors will come in. They're like, it looks like stress rashes. And they're like, but we'll pay attention to it. And they would give me like ice to put on my neck and I would calm down and then the rashes would just go away. So another thing that I was called what was called neutropenic. So basically I couldn't eat like pure fruits or vegetables because I guess like it has something to do with like the what's in them, like what's growing in the fruits. Yeah, exactly. The bacteria and stuff. So I had to be very, very careful with that. And so I didn't get like sick or anything. And for me, chemo was not easy. Don't get me wrong, but I lost my hair within the round 2. But I didn't have anything that was just like absolutely detrimental during chemo. So I was lucky in that aspect. But once we get to like round 4, I will talk about having to get my port in. And that was probably that next step. And also right in the middle of my 3rd round was my biggest mental hurdle by far. I ended up losing my 3-year-old puppy because of cancer. And
Because the puppy had cancer? Oh
yep.
my gosh.
And I took him to all his chemo sessions before I was even diagnosed. So me and him were fighting this battle together. And that was my first bout of pretty much saying like everything's happening to me, not for me. And I started to blame God, and I started to not want to go to chemo. And I started to just like, I was so upset for a good 4 to 5 days because I thought the universe just hated me. I thought, everything was going wrong. And that was a big turning point though in my life, because the day that I remember laying in my bed looking up and I'm like, is this, what Duke, my puppy at the time, or my parents or Lauren or my friends or anybody would want me to do is just give up on myself? And I said, absolutely not. And that day I got up and I just did something small. Like I was telling you before, one little thing every single day to get me to eventually getting out of chemotherapy. And it was a big mental shift in my life for sure.
Yeah, no, it sounds so powerful. And I love the messages in there, Matthew, like including don't swing for the fences. You've got to go for the small wins to build yourself and get out of that hole. It's hard. I mean, I think the mental, health part of this is underlooked, underrated, underappreciated. When people go through physical stuff, it's easy to say, oh, wow, look at how hard that is. But the mental stuff is equally, if not harder sometimes, right? So thank you for sharing that. I think that message
Absolutely.
will really help a lot of people. You mentioned the hair loss. It is one of the, big, most frequently asked questions, just because I think it's not just about the hair, but it's the identity issue. It's sort of, oh my gosh, I actually look like a cancer patient now. Describe, I know you had written in your timeline, it really was around your second round of chemo.
Yeah.
It's pretty quick that you lost your hair. How did you process it and sort of get through that part?
Yeah, so eventually it started kind of coming out in clumps, and I started to look like, like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, if anyone knows about that, who he looks like. It was bad. It was really bad, but I had some comedy in it. And the one thing that I actually kept on was I had this like crazy, and I don't have a picture of it. I had this crazy dirty mustache with like a little bit of hair. And I said, you know what? Like, I'm going to keep on this mustache while I shave my head for however long I possibly can. I don't know how long it'll be, but I'll just keep it on as long as I can. The really cool story was all my friends noticed, and they're like, hey, listen, like, we aren't going to let you do this alone. So they all grew mustaches, like all of my guy friends, all the dads, throughout the entire journey of my chemotherapy.
That's
And
awesome.
it
You've got
was
to send a
super.
picture of that. You've got to send a picture.
Yeah, I'll have to send a picture of it. It was really cool. And it's going to actually lead into another segment here in a little while of something that we created out of this. And so powerful. And it was such like amazing to see that. And yes, it was really challenging because like I said, I had red hair, and it really like, I was afraid. I was wearing hats for probably two weeks at least, just afraid to show it out in public. And eventually I said, you know what, like, what's there to be ashamed of? Nothing. I think so many of us, and this can go in any direction in life, not even just cancer, we're so afraid of what other people think of us that we literally dictate our life around other people's opinions, other people's actions, other people's thoughts. And for me, I said, you know what? I'm going through cancer. Like, I'm going to express this. I don't care if people come up to me or look at me weird. I don't care. I'm going to do it for me. That's it. And I stopped wearing hats, and it was just like, it was a big opening for me to like kind of relieve a lot of that pain that I'd been going through for a lot of years in my life before cancer, of constantly needing to fit into certain groups or being around certain people. So the hair loss was really challenging. And I know for women, it's even more challenging, and I'm very empathetic to that. I can't relate, but I know that, there's, cheers to you, I mean, I understand why there's so many, people going different directions with that. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, and cheers to you too, because it is tough, right? It's the identity issue of, having to deal with it and like looking in the mirror and seeing it. But it sounds like it was yet another empowering moment for you, a weight lifted off when you said, I'm going to own this look, and forget what other people are possibly perceiving. So thank you for sharing that as well.
Yeah.
My last question about the chemo recovery portion is just when you were at home recovering for that week, Did anything else? I know you said overall you didn't have anything that was super debilitating, which is great. Day 7 was the worst of it. Any last thing you want to say to people about, recovering at home? Because I know at the hospital, you're like on a regimen, it's the nurses are taking care of you and they're giving you the anti-nausea medication so you don't feel the nausea, which by the way, people, if you can, you got to stay ahead of the game there. Because once you feel the nausea, it's like too late. Any tips for the home part of it?
Yeah, I mean, if you have somebody that's there for you, make sure that they're staying on top. I mean, my dad was like a second nurse to me, pretty much. Like he knew everything. Like literally, as crazy as this is, throughout my journey, when we start talking about the other stuff, like nurses would come in and be like, "Are you also a doctor?" Because he's like one of those people when he needs to know all the information. And when he does, he's very smart, he's very intelligent, and he always stays on top of things. So he would make sure I had my nausea medicine, make sure I had that. So I would say, make sure you I'm not saying you have to have someone like that, but have somebody in your life that will help you, because there's going to be days where you easily forget things. This is such a challenge because you're just like, I just want to be able to get up and do things. But also when you're at home too, in the days you feel good, because there were days I felt good, it kind of sucked because as I started to feel good again, I had to go back to chemotherapy, that the next weekend, Saturday and Sunday, I was like, I'm feeling good now. I'm not like perfect, but I'm feeling better. And for me, it was like, some days I'd even go to work. For some people, you can go to work or you go out and do things, live your life. Don't let cancer, if you are feeling good that day, don't just sit around, go out, go for a walk or go to work or go around, and just be present. And I know COVID's been a challenging moment for a lot of people right now. So you can't really go places because I know how your immune system, and you have to be extremely careful. But get out of the house and go for a walk outside. Get out. Fresh air is like the best medicine there is. So for me, it was, at that time, I was going to work or being around, just other people and making sure that I wasn't just sitting around and moping around all day. So.
Right. No, taking that step outside sometimes can be the hardest, but once you're outside, it shows you, how much better it can be. Actually, just to wrap the chemo I have, and you're talking, I think, is this picture with your parents? I want to pull it up. It's your end of chemo. Can you describe, I know you still had surgery and we're going to cover that next. But if you could just sort of describe the moment for you.
Absolutely. So, that was probably like me. I felt like accomplishing Mount Everest in a sense. It was such a tough whirlwind of 2.5 to 3 months. And when I finally came to that day, and I was just like, I had all the nurses, as you can see, sign it. Has the date on there of November 21st. It was 3 days before or after my birthday. And, for my birthday celebration, we actually, my friends threw a surprise party for me, and there's like 50 of them that showed up. It was incredible. And, but that day, like 3 days later, it was just like, I felt like, okay, like it's downhill from here. I thought, of course. And I was like, what's that next step? I'm ready to go crush it. Right. Let's do it. I know I have to potentially have a surgery, but let's go for it. And it was a really good day to celebrate and to just, I would say, number one, put things in perspective for me. Good. Put life into perspective. It really did. It put life into perspective of all of the things I used to worry about, all of the people I used to try to please, or all of the things in my life that I thought were like so important just weren't. Mm-hmm. You realize what the people who are truly important in your life, you realize the events that are really important in your life, and you realize like that it's not as many things as you think. When you narrow it down, it's very simple. Yep. But we overcomplicate things in life.
It's another great message. Another great takeaway. I know that you then had a surgery. It was supposed to be one surgery. And so if you could, after the chemo, how did your oncologist describe to you what the next step was? And and then let's not talk about the complications just yet, but if you could summarize that plan and the prep going into surgery.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if you want me to backtrack a second, because I know you maybe want to talk about my port. If not, it's okay. But it kind of is a big deal with the surgery. I thank God I had the port. So like fourth round of chemo.
The actual, so you actually had this picture that I've brought up a couple times, but you said the fourth round of chemo, they tried to poke you, it wasn't happening for the IV, and that led to the
Yes.
port discussion.
So here's how it is. It's bleomycin's on the Monday, day 8 of my chemo when I'm feeling absolutely trash. Like it's 7th is the worst day, 8th is probably the second worst day, and then I have to go in for bleomycin. So that was that day. It was the 4th round, and I was going in for bleomycin. They go in to prick me. I am in a wheelchair, by the way. I can't walk. I'm so exhausted. They go to prick me and they miss. And then they do it again. They do it again. They miss 5 times. And they're like, listen, there's no way we're doing any more. They didn't even want to do 5 times. They really only wanted to, obviously, they only want to do once, but they're like, hey, we are totally done. I was on the verge of passing out. And what had happened was, with chemo, my blood or my veins just got shot. No blood return, nothing. And that's what chemo do to you, especially with bleomycin. It's just so powerful. So yeah, really destroyed my veins. So then next day, my oncologist was like, you need to get a port right away, and then we'll get you onto chemotherapy. Excuse me. The next day right after. So I go in, that's the day of my port, get the job done. And it was the best thing I ever did. I'll tell you that. For a lot of us, it's challenging, but it was definitely the best thing I ever did.
Great. Yeah, the port, just the convenience of it, you're saying, and then eventually it would be helpful. So thank you for sharing that. And then now about your transition from the chemo into the surgery, how did your oncologist describe what the surgery was going to be like? And what do you remember from how you had to prepare for it?
Yeah, so about 3 weeks later, I sat down with my oncologist, and he basically sat down and said, Matt, we have some good news and we have some bad news. Good news is your tumor is shrunk from 11 centimeters to 3 centimeters. Bad news, your tumor is wrapped around what's called your inferior vena cava. Now, your inferior vena cava is the central vein that goes from the bottom of your upper body to your heart. And he basically said, we're going to have a 10 to 12 hour surgery with 4 different surgeons involved to remove the tumor, potentially remove the vena cava and all the cancer in your body. And, they scheduled an appointment 2 weeks later. And those 2 weeks in between were some of the longest 2 weeks of my life. I wanted to get it over with. There's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. And finally that day came.
My God, you're describing, the in-between, every waiting period, whether it's waiting for scan results, the scan anxiety, or waiting
Yes.
for a procedure, it's excruciating.
Yes.
You just lived in the moment through those 2 weeks as much as you could, essentially.
Yeah, a lot of talking to people and distracting myself for sure.
Okay, awesome. So just to put in context for people, what we're hearing is that what usually should be a fairly straightforward procedure of a surgery taking out whatever's left of the tumor following chemo, although as you had pointed out earlier, sometimes it's switched, right? It's surgery then chemo. For you, it was chemo then surgery, but the surgery was way more involved than usual because of wrapping the inferior vena cava. So if you could describe going into surgery that day, what you remember, and then I know there was a lot more that happened. If you could summarize the complications.
Yeah. I'll summarize everything. And what I want to share with you guys is this is not the journey you will be going on. I want to tell you this. I've never heard anybody go through this journey that I had to go through. For me, I think I'm crazy. And I think it was God saying, listen, I need to put you through this. When I share this, you're going to understand, but I need to put you through this insane journey in order for you to do what you want to do with your life, in order to have the perspective and to have the vision that I need you to have. So I'm more or less sharing this of resilience. I'm more or less sharing this of giving you hope and positivity of whatever you're going through. This is not to say you're going to have this happen. So what had happened was I get the 10 and a half, it was like 10 and a half to 11 hour surgery going into that day. I just remember I'm with Lauren, saying goodbye to everybody. Saying bye was my grandma, my aunt, my dad, my mom, and Lauren. And I said goodbye to all of them, get into the surgery. Next thing I knew, I wake up 3 days later. And going into the surgery, I was probably around 145 pounds, I would say. So I'd lost about 40 pounds throughout chemo. And coming out of the surgery, so I ended up opening my hip left to right, literally all the way left, all the way to right, took out the vena cava, took out the rest of the cancer, took out the tumor. And when I woke up, I was close to 190 to 200 pounds. What had happened was my body went into this survival mode and caused massive swelling in my stomach. And I remember waking up, I couldn't move. I couldn't really do anything. I remember asking my doctor, I said, is this normal? And he's like, definitely not normal, but the draining should eventually come out. They had a draining tube. The draining should come out of your stomach. I said, okay. Week goes by. I'm out of the hospital. Another week goes by. And throughout that week, when I was at home, I just never felt right. I felt something was just totally off. Obviously, I knew it was a big surgery, but I was just like, there's just something not right here. And, you know, as the draining was coming out of my stomach, all of a sudden, one day it just stopped, just like that. And immediately I was in so much pain that they had to rush me back to the Cleveland Clinic, where they ended up having to drain 7 liters of fluid out of my stomach, causing me to go into complete kidney and liver failure. I had a cone drilled inside my head to relieve potential brain swelling. I had a catheter in my chest. I had a catheter in my neck because they thought I was going to be on dialysis the rest of my life, and ended up falling into a 2-week non-induced coma. So, you know, I won't go crazy in detail because I know we want to talk more about cancer and chemo, but long story short, you know, I ended up being in the ICU for over 40 days. I ended up being in the hospital for 53 days. A week out of my coma, they go to take out one of the catheters in my neck, as they already took out the breathing tube, and they end up having an air rhythm heartbeat as they're taking it out. I have an air rhythm heartbeat. I'm going to cardiac arrest. I have to do 8 minutes CPR on me, and I go back into another 1-week coma. After that, I wake up. It's now Valentine's Day. So this was all January is when I had my January 6th was my first surgery. I went back in like 2 weeks later, and now it's February 14th. And, you know, after that, I just remember waking up and saying, okay, Matt, I have to relive my entire life again. I couldn't move. When I say can't move, couldn't move my fingers, couldn't move anything. And, you know, I just remember waking up to flowers and hearts, because Lauren, by the way, Lauren and my parents never left that room. When I say never left that room for about 2 weeks, they did not leave that room when I was in my coma. Then when I got out of my coma, my dad never still left that room. And Lauren and my mom would, you know, have to go and do something. And then when I went back into another 1-week coma, it was just like all over again. And lot of just support and people coming in and praying for me. A really cool story of faith throughout this too, I want to share this with you guys, is when I was in my first coma, my mom had people go to church and had these massive prayer services. She did 3 of them where hundreds of people would pray for me. And in the middle of the last prayer services, people were praying for me, was the day that I woke up from my coma. And I woke up in Lauren's hands, of her holding my hand. Every day she'd walk up to me, she would hold my hand and say, Matt, wake up. Matt, wake up. Or she'd try to, you know, see if I was waking up. And that day, in the middle of the last prayer service, was that. And for me, it was God saying, Matt, this isn't the end of your journey. This is just the beginning. And, you know, so.
That's just incredible. Yeah. I mean, even just going through those pictures, right? Like, and how odd it must have been for you to look back on those, because obviously you were in a coma and completely unaware of what was happening. Meanwhile, the caregivers are the ones experiencing this whole thing. So to sum up, I mean, you had 5 surgeries, you were in the ICU, you were in comas, multiple. You had your final surgery March 1st. We're going to get ready to dive into this last segment, because that's where I think we're going to hear so much of what you learned. But but thankfully, the one good news is, even though you had so many things happen, at the end of it, was your oncologist able to tell you, okay, you don't have evidence of disease? What was that conversation?
Yeah, that was actually my urologist who was able to tell me that, because he's the one who did all 5 surgeries on me. You know, throughout that 53 days in the hospital, I really, it was not even 53 days. I mean, I was in the hospital for 53 days, but just in a matter of probably 40 days when I had all of those surgeries. And the last surgery I had was called open wound surgery, because what happened, my 4th surgery, they were getting ready to almost wheel me out, not of the hospital, but to my last stages of physical therapy. And my stitches popped open, spleen was sticking out of my stomach, and they rushed me in for a 5th major surgery, where that's where they did an open wound. And after that, he knew everything that was going on in my body. So he could tell me that, like, hey, there's no evidence of cancer, anything. And, you know, if it's okay, I want to share one really cool story, last story. And that is when I was released from the hospital after 53 days. It was March 17th of 2017. And the coolest story about it is I had met Lauren on March 17th of 2016, exactly 1 year from when I was released. And I know for a fact that's not a coincidence. I know for 100% fact, that's not a coincidence. We met on March 17th, 2016. I was released exactly 1 year from when we were, together. And I think that was God saying, I'm putting an angel in your life. And for a lot of us, I think that sometimes we need to recognize who that person is in our life. And when we do, sometimes we take them for granted. And we can't take that person for granted too much. We have to realize them and really appreciate them in our lives.
Yeah, there's a huge message there about, living in the present in every way possible, including the people who are present for us in our lives. So I'm so happy you had all the support. I mean, it's clear you're very loved, and it helped get you through what was a very difficult time. My last question here, just to confirm, not really a question, but the protocol for following up was seeing your oncologist and was it getting a scan, or just seeing your oncologist and doing blood work every 3 months? And then I know that was for the first 2 years, and now it's every 6 months.
Yep. So basically, yeah, I mean, for the first, it was basically every 3 months to start for the first like 2.5 to 3 years. And then it got to 6 months. So now it's actually almost like 6 to 8 months. And the cool part about it is, since I am 4 years officially cancer-free, with testicular, thank you. With testicular cancer, I don't have to do, unless they see something weird, I don't ever have to do another CT scan again. It's only blood work moving forward, which is awesome. Because it's great news. I don't have to go through that radiation part of it, and all the stuff that can, have side effects. So that was really good news for me. So yeah, it was 3 months for a while, and then it got to 6 months to now 8-ish.
And then it'll maybe be like eventually it moves to like a year, every year, that kind of.
Yeah, I believe after 5 years, it's like a year or something like that. Yeah.
And so then, to be clear, the follow-up the first couple of years, when it says every 3 months, it was a scan and meeting with your oncologist then.
Oh yeah. Yep. Okay. A scan, blood work, meet with the oncologist. Yep.
Well, Matthew, oh my gosh, that was a long ride, and thank you for summarizing it. I'm really excited about this next part where Matthew's gonna talk about all the rest of the takeaways and more guidance for other people on how to get through something that is so overwhelming, to say the least. So stick with us.